My father called my husband a servant at my mother's 60th birthday party. Not jokingly, not accidentally, not in the way people sometimes say something stupid and immediately realize they've crossed a line. No, he said it deliberately, clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Then he laughed. And the worst part wasn't what he said. The worst part was that nobody looked surprised. Not my mother, not my brother, not my aunts, not my cousins, not even my husband. Especially not my husband. Marcus just smiled. That calm, polite smile he'd perfected over the years. The smile that said, "I'm used to this." And the second I saw that smile, something inside me broke. Because nobody should ever get used to being disrespected. Especially not by people who claim to love you. But by then, it had been happening for nearly 13 years. 13 years of insults disguised as jokes. 13 years of favors. 13 years of expectations. 13 years of watching my family take advantage of the kindest man I'd ever met. And somehow, I kept convincing myself things would get better. They never did. In fact, they got worse. Much worse. But before I tell you about that birthday party, you need to understand who Marcus was. And more importantly, who my family was. Because none of this happened overnight. The resentment, the entitlement, the humiliation. It grew slowly, like mold inside a wall. Hidden at first, then suddenly everywhere. I met Marcus when I was 24. I was working as an office manager for a property management company. Marcus owned a landscaping business. Not a huge company, not some millionaire entrepreneur story. Just a hardworking guy with a truck, a trailer, and an insane work ethic. When I first met him, he was covered in dirt. Literally. He'd been repairing irrigation systems all day. His shirt was stained, his boots were muddy. His hands looked like he'd spent 20 years fighting rocks. And somehow, he was still the most attractive man in the room. Not because of how he looked, because of how he carried himself. Marcus had something I'd rarely seen in people. Quiet confidence. He didn't need attention. He didn't need validation. He didn't need to be the smartest person in every room. He just showed up, did the work, treated people well, and went home. The older I get, the more attractive that becomes. Our first date lasted almost 6 hours. We sat in a diner until closing time, then moved to the parking lot and kept talking, then stood beside our cars talking even longer. At one point, I remember checking my phone, 3 in the morning. Neither of us had noticed. That's how easy it felt. No games, no performance, no pretending, just conversation. Real conversation. I knew, within a few months, that Marcus was different. The problem was, my family noticed too, and they didn't like it. My father met Marcus about 6 months into our relationship. The entire interaction lasted maybe 20 minutes. And somehow my father managed to insult him 3 separate times. That's actually impressive, if you think about it. Most people need at least an hour. The first insult came during introductions. Marcus explained that he owned a landscaping company. My father immediately asked, "So what's your real plan?" Marcus looked confused. "What do you mean?" My father laughed. "You can't mow lawns forever." The room got awkward immediately. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me. Marcus simply smiled. "We do commercial contracts, still landscaping." Marcus nodded. Yes, my father took a sip of coffee. Sounds unstable. And there it was, the beginning, the very first crack. Looking back now, I should have paid more attention. Because people tell you who they are. The problem is we don't listen when we don't like the answer. Marcus handled it beautifully. Always did. He never got defensive, never raised his voice, never argued. Which somehow irritated my father even more. See, people like my father enjoy conflict. They enjoy getting reactions. It makes them feel powerful. Marcus refused to play. That made him difficult to control. My mother was different, much more subtle. She didn't insult Marcus directly. She specialized in comparison. Everything became a comparison. Usually involving my younger brother, Brandon. Brandon had a finance degree. Marcus owned a landscaping company. Guess which one she preferred mentioning? Every conversation somehow circled back to Brandon. Brandon's promotion. Brandon's new car. Brandon's investments. Brandon's future. Meanwhile, Marcus was standing right there, smiling politely, pretending not to notice. After a while, I started noticing something strange. Marcus remembered every insult. Not because he brought them up. Because of what happened afterward. Little things, tiny things. A slight pause before family gatherings. A deeper breath when my mother called. The way his shoulders tightened whenever my father's name appeared on his phone. He never complained. That's what made it worse. You can't defend someone who refuses to complain. So I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad. Another mistake, one of many. We got married 2 years later. Small wedding. Nothing extravagant. Actually, our wedding revealed more about my family than I realized at the time. The reception venue required setup the day before. Guess who spent 10 hours helping? Marcus. My father, my brother, my uncles, several cousins, all present, all available. Yet somehow Marcus did most of the work, setting tables, moving chairs, loading decorations, organizing deliveries. At one point, I remember watching him carry heavy boxes, while Brandon sat at a table scrolling through his phone. I made a comment about it. My mother immediately laughed. "Oh, Brandon isn't good at that stuff." Interesting. Because Brandon wasn't good at lots of things. and somehow that always excused him. Marcus, meanwhile, became good at everything, which meant he got volunteered for everything. That's how it starts. Not with cruelty, with convenience. The family discovers one person is reliable. One person always says yes. One person never complains, and slowly they stop appreciating it. Then they stop noticing it. Then they start expecting it. Then they feel entitled to it. That's exactly what happened. The first major incident came about 3 years into our marriage. My parents wanted a new shed built behind their house, not a small shed, a large one. Professional estimates came back around $12,000. My father hated that number, so naturally he called Marcus, not to ask, to inform. There's a difference, I remember the conversation perfectly. We were eating dinner. Marcus had worked nearly 12 hours that day. His phone rang. My father's name. Marcus answered, listened quietly, then said, "That's a pretty big project." Pause, more listening. Then, "I'll think about it." That surprised me. Marcus never said that, ever. After hanging up, he stared at his plate. Silent. "What happened?" He shrugged. "Dad wants me to build a shed." I nearly choked. "Build it?" Marcus nodded. Apparently, my father had already purchased materials, already made plans, already told neighbors, without asking. My father had literally committed Marcus's time and labor before Marcus agreed. That should have been the moment I intervened. Instead, I tried diplomacy. I called my mother. Big mistake. She immediately acted confused. "Oh, we assumed Marcus wouldn't mind." Assumed, another dangerous word. People who use you love assumptions. I explained that Marcus was busy, tired, running a business. My mother's response? Family helps family. That phrase became her favorite weapon. Family helps family. Funny how it only worked in one direction. When Marcus helped them, it was family. When Marcus needed help, suddenly everybody was busy. The shed took 6 weekends, 6 entire weekends, and not once did Brandon show up. Not once. Not even for an hour. When the project finished, my father invited neighbors over to see it. Want to know what happened? He took credit. Complete credit. Told everyone how much planning went into it. How much effort it required. How proud he was. Marcus stood 5 feet away listening, and my father never mentioned him. Not once. I remember seeing something flicker across Marcus's face. Tiny, gone in a second, but I saw it. Disappointment, not anger. Disappointment, which somehow hurt more. Because disappointment means you expected better, and Marcus still expected better from them. At least back then. That wouldn't last forever, because over the next few years the requests multiplied. Need a fence repaired? Call Marcus. Need landscaping? Call Marcus. Need heavy furniture moved? Call Marcus. Need somebody to drive across town and pick something up? Call Marcus. Need free labor? Call Marcus. Always Marcus, never Brandon. And every single time my parents had an excuse ready. Brandon's busy. Brandon's stressed. Brandon's working. Meanwhile, Marcus was apparently the only human being in America with unlimited free time. One Christmas Eve, my father actually called at 9:30 at night because his snowblower wouldn't start. I wish I were making that up. 9:30. Christmas Eve. We were literally wrapping presents. Marcus drove over anyway. Of course he did. Because Marcus was still trying to earn respect from people who had already decided not to give it. The thing is, Marcus never understood what I eventually realized. My parents didn't disrespect him because of what he did. They disrespected him because of who he was. A hardworking guy from a working-class family. Someone who built something with his hands. Someone who didn't have a fancy degree. Someone they believed was beneath them. No amount of favors would ever change that. No amount of sacrifice. No amount of loyalty. Nothing. Because the game was rigged from the beginning. And the person who benefited most from that arrangement wasn't my father. Or my mother. It was Brandon. Because while Marcus spent years carrying the family's responsibilities, Brandon spent years avoiding them. And eventually, those avoided responsibilities were going to come back. When they did, they wouldn't just damage Brandon. They would destroy my entire family. And the first warning sign appeared during a Sunday dinner when Brandon casually mentioned a business opportunity. At the time, nobody realized that conversation would eventually cost my parents nearly everything they owned. But Marcus noticed something, a detail everybody else missed, a detail that would become very important later. And what happened next was the moment he finally started questioning whether my family loved him at all. The first person to notice something was wrong with Brandon wasn't my father. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't me. It was Marcus. Of course it was. Because Marcus was the only person in my family who paid attention to reality instead of potential. My parents loved potential, especially Brandon's. Every terrible decision came wrapped in potential. Every failure was temporary. Every disaster was just part of the journey. At some point, they stopped seeing Brandon as he actually was. Instead, they saw the version they wanted him to become. And that version never existed. The warning sign appeared during a Sunday dinner. Brandon had recently become obsessed with real estate investing. Not actual investing, the social media version. The kind where somebody watches 3 motivational videos and suddenly believes they're one rental property away from becoming a millionaire. We were sitting around my parents' dining room table when Brandon launched into another speech. Everybody knew the routine. He'd start with confidence, throw around buzzwords, mention passive income, mention financial freedom, mention networking, then eventually ask somebody for money, usually my parents. This time was no different. "I've got an opportunity." The phrase immediately made Marcus look up. That alone should have told us something. Brandon continued. "A guy I know is flipping houses." My father nodded immediately. Of course he did. My mother smiled. Of course she did. Nobody had even heard the details yet. Marcus quietly kept eating. That was another thing about Marcus. He never interrupted, never argued, never tried dominating conversations. He listened, then spoke only when necessary. Brandon started describing the project, the numbers, the projections, the future profits, the opportunities. And as he talked, I noticed Marcus slowly becoming uncomfortable. Not visibly, just enough, a tiny shift, a small frown. The kind of reaction most people miss. Eventually, Brandon finished. My father looked impressed. "Sounds smart." My mother agreed. "Very smart." Then Brandon delivered the real reason for the speech, the ask, the request, the inevitable conclusion. "I need investors." There it was. I remember Marcus immediately looking down at his plate, almost like he already knew what was coming. My father didn't disappoint. "How much?" Brandon named a number, $50,000. My mother didn't even blink. Not once, $50,000. Meanwhile, when Marcus and I borrowed money years earlier to buy our first house, my parents had treated us like criminals. We needed $12,000. 12, and they spent weeks questioning us, interrogating us, evaluating us. But Brandon wanted $50,000 for a business he barely understood. And suddenly everyone became enthusiastic. Marcus finally spoke. One sentence, just one. "Have you seen the financial statements?" Silence. The room went completely quiet. Brandon looked annoyed immediately. Not defensive, annoyed, which told Marcus everything he needed to know. "What financial statements?" Brandon waved his hand. "That's not really important." Marcus looked at him for several seconds, then nodded slowly. That was it. No argument. No lecture, no fight, just a nod. Looking back, that moment mattered. Because it was the exact second, Marcus stopped believing Brandon was merely irresponsible and started realizing he was dangerous. But nobody listened, especially my parents. 3 months later, they invested. Not $50,000, $80,000, $80,000, most of their savings. When Marcus found out, he nearly dropped a coffee mug. Not because he was angry, because he was stunned. Actually stunned. I remember sitting in our kitchen late that night. The house was quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Marcus stared at the table, thinking. Finally, he spoke. "Your parents are going to lose that money." The certainty in his voice scared me. "Maybe not." Marcus shook his head. "No, just no, nothing else. No speech, no dramatic explanation, just certainty." And the thing about Marcus? When he sounded certain, I paid attention. Because he was rarely wrong. Unfortunately, my parents never paid attention. The next 2 years became a cycle, a predictable cycle. Brandon launched projects. Projects failed. My parents rescued him. Then the cycle repeated again and again and again. Every failure somehow became someone else's fault. Bad market, bad partners, bad timing, bad economy, bad luck. Everybody except Brandon. I started noticing something strange during family gatherings. Every conversation revolved around protecting Brandon's ego, protecting Brandon's feelings, protecting Brandon's image. Reality became secondary. One Thanksgiving, he showed up 2 hours late. No apology, no explanation, just late. My father laughed. "Busy, man. Busy doing what?" Nobody knew. Nobody asked. Meanwhile, Marcus arrived 15 minutes late once because a commercial sprinkler system burst during an emergency. My father spent 20 minutes lecturing him about respect. That's when I started seeing the absurdity clearly. The rules weren't different. The rules were opposite. Whatever Brandon did became acceptable. Whatever Marcus did became unacceptable. No matter what, no matter when, no matter why. The family system required a hero and a servant. Brandon got hero. Marcus got servant. And everyone played their assigned role, including me. That's the part that still hurts. I participated. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but I participated. I tolerated things longer than I should have. I kept hoping things would improve. People waste years waiting for toxic family members to become different people. I certainly did. Then came the deck. The deck changed everything. My parents wanted a massive backyard renovation. Huge project, new deck, new landscaping, new retaining wall. Professional estimates came back around $40,000. My parents hated the number, naturally. Then somebody had an idea, Marcus. Again, I found out during dinner, not because they asked. Because my father was already discussing the project with neighbors. As if it were confirmed. As if Marcus had agreed. As if the decision belonged to him. Which apparently it did, according to my father. That Sunday afternoon remains one of the most uncomfortable moments of my life. My father spread blueprints across the dining table. Everybody gathered around, excited, talking, planning, dreaming. Then my father pointed toward Marcus. Our contractor. Everybody laughed. Everybody except Marcus. I watched him stare at those blueprints. The measurements, the materials, the labor estimates, weeks, possibly months of work. Free work. Then my father said something that made my stomach drop. "We already told people you'd be building it." Silence. Marcus looked up slowly. I knew that look. Very few people did. But I did, because it meant something important. Marcus was angry, really angry. The problem was Marcus almost never showed anger, so when it appeared, it was quiet, dangerously quiet. I never agreed. The room froze. My mother immediately stepped in. Of course you would. There it was. The entitlement. Pure entitlement. Not asking, assuming, not appreciating, expecting. Marcus looked directly at her, then at my father, then back at the blueprints, and for the first time in 13 years, he said no. Just no. One word. The reaction was unbelievable. Honestly unbelievable. You would have thought he'd announced he hated children, or robbed a bank, or kicked a puppy. The entire room exploded. My father immediately got defensive. My mother got emotional. Brandon rolled his eyes. Everybody acted shocked. Shocked. As if Marcus refusing months of unpaid labor was somehow outrageous. That's the thing about users. The first boundary always feels like betrayal to them, because they've mistaken access for entitlement. The argument lasted nearly an hour, and every second revealed something uglier. Nobody asked why Marcus didn't want to do it. Nobody asked whether he had time. Nobody asked whether he was exhausted. Nobody cared. The only thing that mattered was compliance. When compliance disappeared, so did their kindness. My father eventually stood up, face red, voice shaking. Then he delivered a sentence I'll never forget, a sentence that changed everything. If this family ever needed you, you should be willing to help. Marcus stared at him, then answered quietly, I've been helping for 13 years. Silence, complete silence, because everybody knew it was true. Even Brandon, even my mother, everybody. My father looked away. That told me he knew too. But acknowledging reality would have required accountability. And accountability wasn't something my father practiced. The dinner ended badly, very badly. Marcus barely spoke on the drive home, neither did I. The silence felt heavy, painful, different. Finally, I asked, Are you okay? Marcus laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because he was disappointed. Again. I kept thinking eventually they'd treat me like family. That sentence crushed me, because he still wanted it, even after 13 years. He still wanted acceptance, respect, belonging, things my family had no intention of giving him. Then he said something that scared me, something I'd never heard before. I think I'm done. I looked at him immediately. What do you mean? More silence. Then, I think I'm done trying. And honestly, I couldn't blame him, not even a little. What I didn't know then was that Marcus refusing the deck would become the beginning of the end. Because my parents had already made promises. Big promises, financial promises, promises built entirely on Marcus's free labor. And when those promises collapsed, the first cracks appeared in the fantasy they'd built around Brandon. A fantasy that was about to implode. Because while everybody was busy attacking Marcus, Brandon was quietly making decisions that would destroy my parents financially. And the disaster had already started. We just didn't know it yet. The first time my father admitted Marcus was right, it was already too late. Much too late. And honestly, that made it harder to feel sorry for him. Because for nearly 15 years, Marcus had been warning them. Not dramatically, not arrogantly, not with some I told you so attitude, just quietly, consistently, the way responsible people do. The problem was that nobody listens to responsible people until the irresponsible ones create a disaster. And Brandon had finally created one, a massive one. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I was folding laundry when my mother called. She almost never called me directly, not unless she needed something. The second I answered, I knew something was wrong. She was crying, not fake crying, not guilt trip crying. Real panic, the kind of panic that comes from somebody watching their life collapse in real time. Your father had a heart episode. My stomach dropped, immediately. Whatever issues I had with my parents, hearing something like that still hits differently. I drove to the hospital. Fast, too fast. The entire way there I kept replaying worst-case scenarios. Death has a way of shrinking old grudges temporarily. Not eliminating them, just shrinking them. When I arrived, my father was sitting upright in a hospital bed. Alive, tired, scared, older than I'd ever seen him. And that's when I realized something. My father had always seemed indestructible to me, even when I hated him, even when I disagreed with him. He always felt permanent. Seeing him look fragile was unsettling, very unsettling. My mother looked exhausted. Brandon wasn't there. That immediately caught my attention. Because Brandon was always around when there was something to gain. Praise, money, attention, support. But somehow when real problems appeared, he became impossible to locate. Interesting, very interesting. The doctor eventually explained what happened. Stress, extreme stress, blood pressure, exhaustion. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough. Then the doctor casually mentioned financial pressure. My mother started crying again. That's when I knew this wasn't really about health. The health issue was a symptom. The financial disaster was the disease. And the disease had a name, Brandon. Over the next few weeks, the truth started emerging. Piece by piece, the same way ugly truths usually do. Apparently, Brandon's latest business venture wasn't just failing, it was collapsing. Violently, lawsuits, investors, loans, debt, a mountain of debt. The numbers made me physically uncomfortable. Every time new information surfaced, things got worse. Then worse again. Then somehow even worse than that. My parents had co-signed almost everything. Everything. They'd essentially attached themselves to Brandon's sinking ship, and then acted surprised when they started drowning too. Marcus wasn't surprised, not even a little. When I told him what was happening, he simply nodded. That's it. Just nodded. I remember feeling irritated. That's your reaction? Marcus looked at me, carefully, not unkindly. Just honestly. What did you expect to happen? The question annoyed me because it was reasonable. Very reasonable. Brandon had spent years proving exactly who he was. The only people shocked by the outcome were the people who refused to believe reality. My parents included. Then came the foreclosure notice, the family house, the house where I grew up, the house my parents had lived in for over 30 years, the house they nearly lost because of Brandon. When I found out, I genuinely thought my mother was exaggerating. She wasn't. The bank was already involved. Lawyers were already involved. Deadlines were already approaching. The situation was very real. And that's when something happened that made me angrier than I expected. My parents called Marcus, not me, Marcus. After years of disrespect, years of insults, years of treating him like free labor, suddenly they wanted his advice. His expertise, his connections, his help. Funny how that works. I happened to be sitting beside him when the call arrived. His phone lit up, my father's name. We both stared at it. For several seconds, the irony was almost comical. Almost, Marcus answered. I listened quietly. My father sounded different, smaller, less confident, like somebody who had finally run out of options. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes. When it ended, Marcus simply placed the phone on the table. No expression, nothing. Just silence. What did he want? Marcus looked out the window, then laughed softly. The saddest laugh I'd ever heard. He wants help. Of course he did. Because suddenly the landscaper wasn't beneath him anymore. Suddenly, the guy with the unstable career had a successful business, professional relationships, financial knowledge, resources. Interesting transformation. I asked what Marcus planned to do. His answer surprised me. I don't know. That answer genuinely surprised me, because I expected anger, resentment, maybe even satisfaction. Instead, he looked conflicted. Really conflicted. And that's what made Marcus different from my family. He still cared. Even after everything, next month became chaos. Complete chaos, collection notices, legal paperwork, meetings, arguments, constant drama. Brandon kept promising solutions. Of course he did. That's all Brandon ever offered. Promises, not results. Promises. Every week he claimed a new opportunity was coming, a new investor, a new deal, a new breakthrough, the same fantasy he'd been selling for 20 years. The difference was that nobody believed him anymore. Not even my parents. For the first time in his life, Brandon's charm stopped working. And honestly, watching that happen was fascinating, because charm only works while people still have hope. Once hope dies, reality gets very loud. Then came the family meeting, the infamous family meeting. My mother organized it. Everybody attended. Aunts, uncles, cousins, Brandon, my parents, Marcus and me, the entire circus. The moment we arrived, I knew something was wrong. The atmosphere felt desperate, heavy, like people were preparing for surgery. Eventually, my father stood up, cleared his throat, and did something I never thought I'd see. He apologized. Not perfectly, not elegantly, but genuinely. To Marcus. The room went silent immediately, because nobody had ever seen my father do that before, ever. Not once, not in decades. My father looked directly at Marcus and said, I haven't treated you fairly. Silence. I should have. More silence then. And I'm sorry. My mother started crying. My aunts started crying. Half the room looked stunned. Marcus simply sat there, listening, calm, controlled, the same way he always had. Then my father said something that hit even harder. You're the only person who ever tried to protect us. That one landed hard, because it was true. Every warning, every concern, every suggestion, ignored for years, and now here they were, standing in the ruins, finally understanding. Unfortunately, understanding doesn't erase consequences. The house was still in danger. The debt still existed. The damage was already done. Then Brandon stood up and somehow made everything worse, because Brandon still couldn't accept responsibility. Not even now, not with overwhelming evidence. Not with foreclosure notices, not with lawsuits, not with bankruptcy staring everyone in the face. No. He blamed the economy, his partners, bad luck, everybody except himself. The room slowly turned against him, one person at a time. For the first time in his life, nobody defended him. Not my mother, not my father, nobody. And watching that happen felt surreal. The golden child had finally run out of gold. The confrontation lasted hours. By the end, Brandon stormed out, literally stormed out, slamming doors, yelling, threatening, blaming. Classic Brandon. The difference was nobody chased him. Nobody stopped him. Nobody rescued him. For the first time in his life, he was alone with his consequences. After the meeting, my father approached Marcus privately. I wasn't supposed to hear the conversation. I did anyway. My father looked exhausted, defeated. Then he said something remarkable. Why are you still here? Marcus looked confused. My father continued. After everything. Silence. Then Marcus answered. And honestly, it's one of the reasons I love him. Because leaving would have made me like you. My father actually cried, not dramatically, quietly. The kind of crying that comes from finally understanding something painful. The following months were difficult. Very difficult. Marcus helped organize financial recovery plans. Not because he owed anyone anything, because that's who he was. Boundaries existed now, healthy boundaries, but kindness remained. The house was eventually sold, not foreclosed. Sold, smaller home, smaller life, smaller expectations. My parents lost a lot, financially, emotionally, psychologically, but they survived. Brandon disappeared for nearly 2 years. Nobody knew where he was. Honestly, nobody cared much anymore. That sounds harsh, but endless rescue eventually creates exhaustion. Eventually, people stop chasing. The most satisfying moment came nearly a year later. Christmas dinner, same dining room, same table, same family. Only different, very different. My father stood up before dinner, raised his glass, and looked directly at Marcus. Then he said, "The strongest man in this family isn't me. Silence, it's him." Nobody laughed, nobody argued, nobody disagreed, because everybody knew it was true. Marcus looked embarrassed immediately, which somehow made it better. Then my father continued. "I spent years confusing strength with control. The room stayed silent. I was wrong. That was it. No dramatic ending. No perfect reconciliation, just truth. Finally, after 15 years, and honestly, that was enough. Because the best revenge wasn't watching my parents suffer. The best revenge wasn't Brandon failing. The best revenge wasn't being proven right. The best revenge was watching the man they treated like a servant become the person they respected most, without changing who he was, without becoming bitter, without becoming cruel, without becoming them. And in the end, that's what hurt their pride the most. The man they looked down on for years turned out to be the only one holding the family together.